All right, guys, I'm going to take maybe 15 minutes and talk a little bit about organics versus synthetics. I think there's just so much misinformation out there that I figure it's fair that I at least give my input and based on, a lot of data that's out there. Um, so first, I want to talk about some of these hot points that people always tend to talk about when it comes to organics versus synthetics. So, and keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, I am generalizing about people that are properly running their farms. So when I talk about conventional farming, I'm talking about a well-educated, a well-experienced conventional farmer that's doing things properly. There's obviously examples of conventional farmers that are over-applying, and yes, those cases are going to cause damage, and the same can be said for organic. So when I'm talking about organic farms, I'm talking about the people that are doing it properly. There's obviously organic farms that do it incorrectly and cause far more damage. So throughout this talk, I'm assuming both sides are being, practical practitioners of what they're doing and doing things correctly. So, with that being said, synthetics are destroying our soil. You hear this a lot. It's destroying our land and creating these barren deserts. That's not true. So, a properly ran conventional farm doesn't destroy the soil. It does ruin or at least severely limit the microbial diversity and, creates less lush soil. That stuff's all true. But in a synthetic or conventionally ran farm, that stuff isn't necessary. So, even without the microbial diversity and the lush soil that you would see on an organic farm, the synthetic or conventional farms still outproduce the organic farm. So obviously it's not affecting the plants. And so again, ran properly, a conventional field is no worse off than an organic field. Um, and so then the other thing, synthetics creates runoff that ruins our ecosystem, right? Salts are rushing off the fields and killing animals and killing the aquatic life. Again, there are examples of that. That's true on both the organics and the synthetic side, but keep in mind, and I think this is something a lot of people overlook, is synthetics and organics are salts. At the end of the day, it's all salts. And so when you're putting organic stuff onto a field, it's eventually going to break down into a salt. And that's the problem with organic fields, is that eventual breakdown is hard to track. And the composition of what is actually in that organic material is hard to track. So runoff from organic fields tend to be more of an offender when it comes to leaching things like phosphorus and other elements because it's just harder to maintain. As opposed to a conventional farm. You say you can apply 300 parts per million of phosphorus. You know how much the plant takes. You know how much runoff you have. It can be very tightly controlled. With organics, you just have to apply compost, and you can take some samples of the compost, and you kind of get an idea. And based on your microbial life and your temperatures, you can kind of get an idea of the conversion rates and what's going to convert. But it's not all going to convert at the same time. So in organics, it's impossible to limit the salt runoff. And so that's why organic fields, you tend to see higher salt runoffs, especially with phosphorus. So if runoff is your concern, synthetics is the way to go. And I'll touch on this later, but the other thing to keep in mind is with organic production, you typically require twice as much land to grow the same amount of produce. So you have more dangerous runoff and twice the land required to do that. So again, if runoff is a concern, synthetics is the way to go. And then the other thing is synthetics require high amounts of energy to produce, right? We're requiring methane to power up catalysts that, we're basically splitting atoms. So yes, absolutely. Creating nitrogen and ammonia is a highly energy intensive practice. But creating massive amounts of organic fertilizer is maybe not as energy intensive, but it's definitely got a huge carbon footprint attached to that. And so then keep in mind what I just said earlier is organic farms need to use twice as much land to produce the same amount of produce. And so, yes, a single farm, organic farm, produces slightly less energy, but they have to use twice as much land. So that energy quickly becomes offset. And once again, synthetics tends to win out in terms of overall energy efficiency. And then synthetics use dangerous pesticides. I don't want pesticides and chemicals on my food. Organics uses pesticides and chemicals as well. So there's no difference there. And in fact, organics, so there's when it comes to pesticides, there's nothing that says safety or not. If it's organic, it has to be natural based. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous. So a lot of organic apples use copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is definitely not a pesticide that you want to be consuming. Um, and from the worker standpoint, pyrethrins, that's another organic pesticide, and that's been linked to a lot of issues from workers applying it. And so synthetics and organic pesticides are the same. You have to use them properly. You have to be safe. You have to maintain, small residuals. So they're both equal offenders there. And then, you say, but organics supports local growers. Organics is keeping a small closed loop. And now sometimes that's true. So if you go to your farmer's market and you buy from the local grower, that's fantastic. That's what you should be doing, whether it's organic or not. But now with such a demand for organics, we're starting to run out of locally produced organics. So then what do we do to fill that need? Because remember, organics is a huge market. So we're going to fill that need. And so a lot of organics are now being imported from overseas. And with different regulations from different countries, a lot of things get mixed up. There's been numerous occasions where conventional produce is labeled as organic, shipped across, sold in our stores. So the idea of a small carbon footprint when buying organics isn't always true. That organic apple, could have came from across the seas, and it very, very well may be a conventional produce. So those are some key points, and I just wanted to quick debunk some of those. And so now we'll get into a little more detail. So if you want to stick around, we'll talk a little bit more about this. So from a plant's perspective, they don't know the difference, whether it's organic or synthetic. Plants only consume salts. Yes, organics are salts. So plants could care less whether that nitrogen came from manure or came from an industrialization process. They don't care. Not only do they not care, they can't tell. It's the same element. So the things like the soil food web, and again, we talked about with the soil in a conventional farm, the soil food web, all this beneficial bacteria, all of these kind of symbiosis that is absolutely necessary and crucial in nature don't really apply to commercial farming because it's not necessary. We don't need that interaction to create salts. We can already create the salts and provide the salts. So you don't need all of that working. That's why hydroponic works. You can get faster yields and bigger yields without any microbial action. So it's something that with organics you need, but it doesn't create a healthier plant. You can get perfectly fine plants without it. And that's been proven, obviously, through hydroponics. And then there's the issue of, but chemicals scare me. Like, I don't want things I can't pronounce. I don't want these big, scary words in my food. And so let's talk about what that means. So organics, from a scientific definition, is any compound that contains carbon. So that's pretty broad, but that just means it's organic. And organic chemistry deals with that quite extensively. So then what's a chemical? A chemical is literally everything. Everything you see right now and touch and feel is a chemical. That's just what our world is made up of. But let's assume people are talking about harmful chemicals, right? Things that are potentially toxic. And so if you're thinking about toxic chemicals, and if that's what you're meaning when you say I don't want chemicals on my food, then let's compare that statement. So with your typical organic inputs, manure and urine are always hand in hand. They come together as a kind of a package deal. They come from the same source. Compost, plant residue, all these different organic inputs. And then compared to your synthetic inputs, which are just salts. So calcium nitrate, monopotassium phosphate, magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, pure salts, pure elements. And so when you're looking at chemicals or toxicity, obviously manure, urine, compost, those are going to have the potential to carry more toxic chemicals than just the straight salts. So again, if you're looking at, I don't want harmful chemicals on my food, then synthetics is the choice as well. Now, of course, a properly ran organic farm, as I said earlier, you don't have these issues, but it's absolutely a higher risk than would be with synthetics. And one point here, and I think this is an interesting point for a lot of people to understand, is when you say I look at bottled nutrients, I look on the back of the label. What's all this scary stuff? And essential elements for plants are pretty much the exact same essential elements for humans. So plants require, or they can consume 21 elements. 17 of those elements are required by plants. 14 of those elements are derived from the nutrient source that we provide. And then 3 are from the atmosphere. So comparing these two, you look at the back of a bottle of your multivitamin, your 1-a-day multivitamin. You look at the back of that bottle, you compare the ingredients to the back of a bottled nutrient. They're going to be the same thing. They're going to be very similar. So why is one to say I'm fine with taking my multivitamin, but these synthetic nutrients that I give my plants is scary? And I think that's a lack of just understanding. They're the same thing. So things like phosphorus, potassium, calcium, those are all human elements, human requirements. So there's nothing scary about what's in a bottled nutrient. It's literally what we consume and need ourselves as humans. Now, granted, the ratios are different, but I would drink a glass of my hydronutrient long before I would drink a glass of compost tea for obvious reasons, right? So, that's another irony I think that's worth pointing out. So then you talk about plant growth rates and yields. So most organic people will concur that synthetics yields more. And it's really simple on why that is, because again, plants consume salts. They don't care where it came from. So if a plant is given organic inputs, they have to do a lot of work to break that down. They have to turn that stuff into salts. So they rely on microbial interactions. They rely on a lot of other processes to get those salts. So then if you just give the plant salts, it's so much more efficient. The plant doesn't have to work for it. It just grows. And so that's exactly why, hydroponics specifically, but that's why synthetics yields a lot more. It's just more dense nutrients that are more available to the plants. So that's pretty straightforward. And then the thing of, well, organic produce is better for you, right? It's healthier. Um, and that's unequivocally not true. There's been countless studies that have shown there's very, very minimal difference in organic produce versus conventional produce. There has been some studies that have confirmed that there's higher level of antioxidants in organic produce, very minimal. Um, but the studies of what antioxidants actually benefit humans are still kind of out there. We're still not sure. And we also don't know at what point or what level of antioxidants is needed to even be beneficial. So to really label that as a pro is possibly misleading. It's just an interesting fact, maybe. Um, so, you look at things like pesticide residuals. So yes, conventional produce will or tends to have higher levels of trace pesticides on the produce. Both organic and conventional have trace levels of pesticides. Conventional tends to have higher levels. But it's been proven for decades that these trace levels have no impact on health. It's so minor. I mean, you pick up more toxins in your daily life than you would ever from the residual pesticides on produce. And those are just studies that have been proven countless times over and over. So it's a minimal risk. It's not something to lose sleep over. It's perfectly fine. Now, if you look at things like organic produce, things like copper sulfate, a lot of organic apples use copper sulfate. Again, that's something you want to avoid. And there's other things like I mentioned earlier with pyrethrins and stuff. And then also with organic produce, you tend to have more bacterial outbreaks, viruses, things like Listeria, E. coli. If you follow the news for any time long enough, you're going to see massive recalls of lettuce or different things from these bacterial contaminations, and these are coming from typically organic field production. And that's just inherent in what you're doing. When you're applying, things like manure and compost and this kind of stuff, it's inherent that it's going to come with some of these dangers. Now, obviously, It's not saying every organic produce contains Listeria or E. coli, but it does most definitely have a higher risk than the conventional counterpart. And so then you talk about heavy metals. Heavy metals is a big concern because plants, and especially cannabis, is a hyperaccumulator of these different elements. And so a lot of organic inputs contain higher levels of heavy metals. And so a plant like cannabis will consume those. And so, 9 times out of 10, flower that fails for heavy metals or microbial contamination is going to be from an organic source, not from a conventional source. So there's another reason that conventional flower with cannabis, or be it food, is slightly better for you. So then it's like, okay, well, so is all organics just a sham? Is this pushed by these elitist food bloggers that, create this idea that organics is better, and if you don't have organics, you don't care for the world? Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. That's not the whole story. But when you think about corporations, what's the largest organic supplier of food in the country, if not the world? It's Whole Foods. Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. It doesn't get any more corporate than that. So the idea that organics is this small grassroots thing is not true at all. There's huge lobbying and huge corporate dollars behind pushing this marketing facade of organics is healthy and safe, and millions of people buy into it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to enlighten some of you guys on, is there's this marketing ploy to create these ideas that this is safer, it's better for the world. And so it's admirable to want to agree with that. But you got to look a little bit deeper than the surface. You got to kind of see past some of the stuff and see what the data really shows and see what the science really shows. And that's what I've done. That's where I've come to my conclusion. But it's out there if you look hard enough, look beyond the commercials and things like that. And here's the hard part for me. So this is what I always call the organics, the ideal, right? The idealist viewpoint that organics is the way to go. We should all have a plot of land. We should all grow organically with just the inputs on our farm, feed our family, feed our friends. That's fantastic. I wish that could be the case, and I would do that. I mean, I have land here. I could do that. But most people can't do that. The population is massive right now, and the amount of people that are willing to actually grow food is tiny. So we have to make the most of our land. We have to rely on things like technology and efficiency to create food for people. So to say that, oh, let's all just go back to regenerative, let's all just start plowing our lands, is naive to say the least. It's just not possible. Maybe 200 years ago, as pioneers, we could have done this. We could have all just had organic inputs, have a few cows, the cows fertilize the crop, but we're so far past that. So it's silly to think that we can do that again. We have to think bigger than that. We're way past that point. And so it's where synthetics can fill that niche that organics never could. Organics can't feed the world. There's just not enough organic inputs or not enough land to feasibly do that. So the train's taken off, and synthetics is what's feeding us today. And so it's improving that model is the way to go, not destroying it and kind of reverting back. It just wouldn't work. And so then I get this a lot, and that's kind of why I created this video. I always speak out in comments on different things on Instagram or whatnot, and there tends to be a lot of quick negativity to my view, and people just assume I work for corporations and I'm an evil, greedy person that just wants to see the world, tarnish. And it really couldn't be anything further from the truth. My goal has always been creating safe, sustainable, produce or food or cannabis flower in my sense. And for those of you that followed my channel, you'll know that that's what I've preached for many years, is being as efficient as possible. I don't use lighting. I use minimal amounts of water. I use minimal amounts of inputs. I don't use any amendments. That's always been my mantra, is creating safe, sustainable food. And so for me,
that's why I choose synthetics. That's why I choose hydroponics. That's why I grow in a greenhouse, because those check all the marks. I couldn't accomplish those things if I was, say running my acreage 100% organic. I wouldn't be able to reach those goals that I want. So I'm in line with organic proponents when they say, I care about the world, I care about the environment, I care about this food safety. That's exactly why I choose the things I choose. And I know that seems counterintuitive to a lot of you, but that's really just kind of what the data shows. So then it says, how then can I be organic? How can I be sustainable? And the answer to that is buy local produce, and regardless of it's organic or not. That doesn't matter. If it's local, it's going to be sustainable. It's going to be the most sustainable option. And then buy seasonal produce. Buying produce when it's locally grown. Again, whether it's organic or not, that doesn't matter. Buy things seasonal. So there's things to do to get to the goal of sustainability and closed loop growing and things like that. But it's not going to, Walmart and buying the organic lettuce. That's not helping anything at all. That's just putting money into the organic market. So if you really want to be organic and sustainable, do these things. Go to your farmer's market, buy from the local farmer, buy the stuff that is grown near you, that's grown in season, and disregard whether it's organic or not. I think that's a key point to keep in mind. And so finally, I will wrap this up. As far as a farming standpoint, what's the answer? What's the future hold? And I think most people that have spent any time looking at both sides of this will say it's a combination of both. It's a combination of conventional and organic practices. You combine the two of those, you take the best from organics, you take the best from conventional, combine them, and create something better than we've ever seen. And I think that is the future, and that is the way to create safe food in an abundance that we need at levels that reduce the harm to our environment. That is absolutely the answer. Our population is only getting bigger. The land we use is only shrinking. So we need to maximize that potential. And that is definitely with a kind of dual approach. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully this opened your eyes to some of these things. But the final thought, I guess, is if you're 100% synthetic proponent, look at the organic side. Look at some of the things they do and maybe form a better opinion on the way you kind of grow and think about this. And then obviously the opposite. If you're 100% organic, look at some of the downfalls that organics offers. Look at some of the positives of conventional farming and find yourself somewhere in the middle of those two things. I think that's the goal. So hopefully this was somewhat informative to some of you, but thanks for listening.